I think my destiny is to be remembered as three-time Emmy Award winner, Bill Einreinhofer. I often joke that half the people in China think that my first name is three-time Emmy Award winner because that's how I've always been introduced. I've been really fortunate, extremely fortunate, in that I've had a career where, by and large, I've had the opportunity to do what I wanted to do the kinds of things that I wanted to do. I went to St. Mary's, then St. Mary's, now St. Mary High School here in Rutherford, and I was on the school paper, and I really enjoyed that. And then I went to college. I went to St. Peter's College, now St. Peter's University in Jersey City, and I was on the newspaper there too. But I got in a fight with the editor, and in a huff, I said, "That's it, I quit," and I walked out on the newspaper. And so I think to myself, what do I do now? Well, I'll go to the college radio station. And so the newspaper was up in an important building at the top of the campus, and the radio station was in a warehouse at the bottom of the campus. But I went down there and I joined the radio station. It changed my life because I didn't go into print journalism. I went into electronic journalism. And as we all know, print journalism has been fading, and is almost gone now. There was no communications major at St. Peter's, so I created a minor out of different courses, which allowed me then to get into the University of Wisconsin for my graduate degree. And part of my deal was that I was going to be, as a work-study student, be a production assistant at the local public TV station. I think this is great, I'm getting into the business. Well, I arrived there, and I've been in Madison, Wisconsin for 2 days, and I find out that the chair of the communication arts program wants to meet with me. And I'm thinking, how could I get in trouble? I haven't even been to class yet. And he brings me in and he says, Bill, the instructor who was supposed to be teaching the lab sections of the radio production course, well, he's not coming. He's not here. And the term starts next week. Could you teach those lab sections? And of course, we'll give you the in-state tuition now. And by the way, we'll give you a break, so don't worry, you're not going to have to pay as much. And at that moment, I was sent down a path, and part of that path was that no, I wasn't going to be a production assistant leading, in all likelihood, to an administrative position in TV, but rather I was going to be involved in production. I was going to be making short stories. I was going to be making documentaries. I was going to be out there in the field. And I was going to be an educator. I was going to teach. So my family's history in Rutherford dates back to the 1920s. My mother, Alberta Herman Einreinhofer, was born in Brooklyn, and then as a child, she was in Weehawken. Then her family moved to Rutherford, and she lived at 150 Mountain Way. Now, I grew up right down the street at 185 Mountain Way. So not only do I have my mother's stories of growing up on Mountain Way, I have my stories of growing up on Mountain Way. If you ever want to hear about the day Mountain Way was paved, I'm the person to talk to. She was a member of the class of Rutherford High School in 1936. She met my dad at what is now the Sunoco station on Park Avenue. It used to be, well, it was an Exxon station. Before that, it was an Esso station, and he was working at the Esso station, and she pulled in. She had just graduated from high school. She had gotten, as a gift, this fine automobile. She pulled in to fill up with gas, and that's where she met my dad. We've been involved in Rutherford for a long time. My mother was part of old Rutherford, the Rutherford that predates World War II. My father was very much a part of the new Rutherford, the Rutherford that came after World War II, where a lot of people were coming in, especially from Hudson County, and we're moving into town. And my dad had a soda business, and he made good money, but he was competing against Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola, and that was probably not a good idea. So when I came along, he got involved in government. He got a job at the county as a court clerk. Eventually, he became chief clerk of the courts. His part-time job was first as a member of the Rutherford Town Council, and then from the mid-60s to the mid-1970s, he was mayor of Rutherford. Dad was on the council when the Rutherford Civil Rights Commission was established. During the years that he was mayor, he appointed members of the Rutherford Civil Rights Commission, so that when a few years back I was asked to become a member of the commission, I couldn't help but think that, that my dad would be very proud, that, that finally, you know, I was involved with the town. He had always wanted me to run for council. And he said, don't worry, Bill, you know, our names are the same, William Einreinhofer. People will see the name on the ballot and they'll think it's me and they'll vote for you. And probably that's the only way I could ever have gotten elected. But I left Rutherford, like so many people, and you know, went out into the world to make my mark. And like so many other people, here I am. I'm back in Rutherford again. When I got out of graduate school, I got a job at Channel 13 as a production assistant, and it was fine, but there was only limited possibilities there. So after a couple of years, I jumped ship and I went over to New Jersey Public Television, and I got hired there as an associate producer on a brand new news program. I think I was like the third person they hired for the program. Well, 4 years later, I was the senior producer of the program, and Channel 13 decided that they'd let a good one get away, and they brought me back as an executive producer for local programming. And most of what I was doing was pretty typical public affairs shows. As we used to say, four people sitting around a table talking about sewage. One day my boss, or one of my bosses, said to me, you know, Bill, I've noticed on local TV here in the New York area, there's really nothing about science and health and technology. There's a niche there. There's all sorts of interesting things happening in this area. World-class accomplishments, and nobody's covering them. And here's the most important thing. And she said, if we do a show about that, I think I can get it funded. So in October, I write a proposal. In January, we have a funding breakfast. In April, we're on the air. And it's a weekly half-hour science, health, and technology magazine called Innovation. Season 1, we were a local show. Season 2, we got picked up by PBS. Season 3, we became an international program. And that's where my first Emmy Award came from. And it was an Emmy Award for the series. And I was very, very proud of that because it was collaborative. I got the award for the series, but frankly, when I went up to pick it up, we all went up to pick it up because it was that kind of program. And yes, I was the executive producer, but what I did was I hired really good people, and then I got out of their way, and I let them accomplish things. While certainly proud of the later awards, that one has a very special place in my heart. For me, growing up in Rutherford was important because the community was so diverse. Diverse in all sorts of different ways. And I arrived here by birth at that point of time when all of these different groups, all of these different trends were all kind of merging and blending together. And I think that gave me an outlook for life, for the world, which set me up for success. I just accepted as normal that there were going to be all kinds of different people with actually all kinds of different ideas, and that everyone was not necessarily going to agree with me. And understanding that at an early age, I think that's important because, as we go out in life, sometimes we think that it's, I know the truth and everybody else, not so much. I learned early on that no, there are other people who are good people, who are nice people, but they may not exactly think I'm doing the right thing. When I was a little kid, I think in many ways I thought everybody's father was a member of the town council. Over at the dinner table, inevitably we'd be talking about things that were going on in town. By the time he was mayor, well, I realized that my family situation was pretty unique. Of course, he was my father, so I thought he was doing great things. In retrospect, looking back now, decades, I see that, in fact, he was doing great things. And I can think of nothing more important than his work with the Civil Rights Commission. The 1960s, the middle 1960s, late 1960s was a very difficult period. In 1968, there were riots over in Passaic. We in Rutherford have historically had an African-American community. And the fact of the matter is that there was racism in this town. It wasn't Mississippi, but there certainly were problems. And my father was willing to address them. And I think in part, it's because of his background. My family's Catholic. And when my father was going to run for mayor, there actually was a meeting of some of the senior people, senior men, it was all guys in those days, some of the senior leaders in town who seriously had a discussion about whether Rutherford was ready for a Catholic mayor. I don't know, maybe they were afraid that the Pope was going to call up and change the garbage collection schedule or something, but this was an issue. There was a time that Catholics, in fact, weren't welcome in Rutherford. Back when in my mother's day, when she was growing up, she told me about how the Ku Klux Klan once burned a cross in Rutherford. And of course, they didn't like blacks, and they didn't like Jews, and they didn't like Catholics. When the Catholic Church, when they wanted to establish and build a church here in Rutherford, nobody would sell them property. So the trustees of the local Catholic parish, they had to buy the property in their own name, which then became where the church was. The reason it was zoned for churches is across the street there was a little Unitarian church. And so, thanks to the Unitarians, the Catholics were able to build their church. My dad, he was not the full-time mayor because his primary job was chief clerk of the courts at Bergen County, but he was not home in the evening because he did his daytime job during the day, and in the evening it was all about him being mayor. And he took his responsibility very, very seriously. If you're the mayor of a small town, little decisions can have a tremendous impact. Take when it snows. When it snows, everybody's unhappy because we're the snowplows. And my father believed if you're going to be mayor, your phone number has to be in the phone book. So when people wanted to complain, they could find him. So people would call up and say, "Hey, Mr. Big Shot, where are the snowplows? I bet they've already plowed your block." And my father had arranged with the folks in the DPW that our block would be the very last block in Rutherford to be plowed. So that when anybody called up, my father could say, no, plow hasn't come through your block. Hasn't come through my block either. I'm sure they're going to be there in a while. And I think that sort of good-natured approach, I think that helped the town through a difficult period. I know that it endeared him to many, many people here. The first time he ran for mayor, he won by 5 votes on the machines. And somewhere in the basement, there's a picture of him at campaign headquarters, smiling and holding up his hand. Now, when they counted the absentee ballots, it became a landslide. He won by 37. But in each successive election, he got more and more votes because yes, he was a Republican, and he was very proud of that. But when it came to the issues for the town, he crossed party lines, and he worked with members of the Democratic Party. This town is very, very lucky in that the people who have run for office, the people who have attained office in this town, they're not here about the money. They're not here about the power. They're here because they really care about the community. And that's something that binds the town together. It's something that I think that does make Rutherford pretty unique. I was brought in to the Rutherford Civil Rights Commission to work on the video project, Rutherford Historic Narratives, an oral history series. And, professionally, I've accomplished a lot over the years, but I can't think of anything that I am prouder of than my role in this series. And that's because Rutherford's in constant change. There are always new people moving in, and they don't necessarily know the stories of our town, of our community. And if you don't talk to people, if you don't record those conversations, those stories are going to slip away. We interviewed Margaret Shack, who was the first woman to be mayor. She grew up in Rutherford during the Depression, and she told us what it was like to be here then. She told us the inside story on how she became mayor. The then mayor resigned. He had personal issues, the family issues that he had to take care of. And so they needed somebody to be mayor. And that somebody had to be a Democrat because it was a Democrat who had resigned as mayor. And essentially, nobody else wanted the job. And so Margaret said, well, I'll take it. And thus became the first woman to be mayor of Rutherford. And her big issue was the Meadowlands, which obviously has had a tremendous impact on development in the town. If we had not interviewed her, a lot of those stories would be gone. The same with former Mayor Andy Bertone. Andy was a close friend of my father's. Andy, it turns out, was a member of the borough council or the mayor, when you put all that time together, longer than anybody else in the history of the town. And fortunately, we were able to interview him before we lost him. If we hadn't gone to see him that Sunday afternoon, those stories, by and large, would have been lost. And to know that I had the opportunity to help preserve those stories and many, many others, I take great pride in that. And I view myself as extremely fortunate in that I was able to make that kind of contribution. And it was the sort of contribution that I could make because of my professional background. Because of the person I am professionally, I was able to do this personally. And the person I am professionally, in large part, is because of the person who grew up here in Rutherford. At my age, many people are either thinking about retirement or they are retired. My brother, who's 2 years younger, has retired, and he and his wife they live on Long Beach Island now. Right now, I'm not really thinking about retirement. I'm at a stage of my life and stage of my career where I enjoy what I'm doing. I enjoy teaching. I teach at the New York Film Academy. I'm the chair of the broadcast journalism program. I love working with our students. They come from across the United States, around the world, New Jersey. You just meet all kinds of different people. And as an educator, I know that I change their lives. And so I'm reluctant to give that up. Professionally, last year, I had a documentary that aired on 180 US public TV stations. It's been sold to international broadcasters in Europe and Asia. It's been used in many, many high schools and college classes here in the United States. I'm actually working on a new documentary proposal now. I'm the executive producer of an independent feature film. It's a a China-Vietnam-U.S. co-production. I went to Vietnam twice last year. I went to Kazakhstan earlier this year. I'm going back to China later this year. I'm reluctant to give that up. I mean, eventually, yes. Eventually the time comes that, okay, that's it. But I haven't reached that point yet. I'd like to say that there was a great idealistic reason that I moved back to Rutherford. But in fact, the reality was that I was living in Hoboken, and I had been in Hoboken for a number of years. And one morning, I just threw open the shutters, and I looked out the window, and I said, Bill, this town is too young for you. You've got to get out of here. So, okay, I'm going to move someplace. I'm going to buy something. And then I said, wait a minute. Why am I going to buy something? I own a house. I inherited the house that I grew up in Rutherford on Mountain Way. I was using it as an income property. I didn't have a tenant at that point, so maybe, I own a house, maybe I should move into that house. And so I spent some money to get some things fixed up, and there I was. And, I was back on Mountain Way, and in some ways, it hadn't changed. Things looked very much the same. In other ways, it had changed a lot. All those people there, I didn't know them. But what I discovered was that even though there are different people with different stories, they were in Rutherford for the same reasons that people had always come to Rutherford. It's a nice town with a good school system. When I was a kid, in some ways, I hated Rutherford because nothing ever happened here. And now that I'm 60 plus years old, I love Rutherford because nothing ever happens here.